So the first problem with the Mishnah is that with 10 utterances we created the world, and then we said that why did it have to be 10 utterances? Because it could have been one utterance, so God could have done it in one shot. So we said that he did it in order to be able to pay back from the wicked that ruin the world and to give reward for the righteous who build the world. And that presumably by doing it with 10 utterances, so then he's going to be able to take more out of the hide, so to speak, of the wicked, and give more to the righteous. Doesn't make any sense though. Why? What exactly that means? And my biggest problem again is that what is this doing here in Pirkey Avos and Ethics of the Fathers? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this chapter. And this is where we go into two very important introductions, which I hope I could do both of them today. But this chapter, if you have a Pirkei Avos in front of you, or if you have a siddur in front of you, then you can see that this chapter is the chapter of numbers. The first Mishnah talks about the 10 utterances that God used in order to be able to create the world. The second Mishnah talks about the 10 generations from Adam to Noah. Then the 10 generations from Noah to Adam. Then it talks about the 10 tests that were given to Avraham Avinu. Then it talks about the 10 tests that were given to the Jews to the Jewish people in Egypt. Then it talks about the 10 miracles that were done in the Beis HaMikdash, 10 miracles that were done in the temple every single day. And then the Mishnah takes a turn from the 10. Oh, and there's one more 10, and there were 10 things that were created on Erev Shabbos Bein HaShmashos. 10 things were created Erev Shabbos right before Shabbos began. Then the Mishnah takes a turn from the 10 and then goes to the number 7. There were 7 things that 7 things are different between a golem, which is like a person who's a clump of clay, and a chacham and a wise person. It's a way of saying an idiot. But there's seven differences, 7 ways of telling the difference between the two. Then in Mishnah 8 and 9, there are 7 types of tragedies that happen in the world, and there are 7 reasons why terrible things happen. Then the Mishnah goes to 4. There are 4 characteristics in a person. There are then another 4 characteristics in a person's personality as far as anger is concerned. Then there are 4 ways of learning. Then there are 4 ways of giving tzedakah, of the different types of people that are benevolent and charitable. Then there are 4 characteristics in those that learn Torah. Then there are 4 characteristics of people that sit in front of rabbis and learn and study from rabbis. And then it goes on to a few other little things. But that's what the chapter is. The chapter is 10, 7, 4. Then you have 3s. And it's interesting that it's numbers. In other words, why would the whole chapter be structured in this numerical form? There are 10 this, 10 this, 10 this. It sounds less like there's a message there than there was a desire to remember things. When Judah the Prince, when Yehuda Nasi wrote the Mishnah, Yehuda Nasi wrote it in a way that very often he would put in sections of the Mishnah, he would put certain ideas so that there would be mnemonics. There would sort of be like memory jogs that you would be able to remember things. There are sections of the Mishnah that are dealing with one type of law, and then all of a sudden you have a section that you have Mishnah after Mishnah after Mishnah after Mishnah that's not dealing with that particular law, like in Megillah, in Tractate Megillah. So there's a famous section that's dealing with all the laws of Megillah, and then it talks about the difference between the first Adar and the second Adar, right? And we know that Megillah, the Purim is kept in the second Adar, so it says there's no difference between the first and the second Adar except for, and then it launches in to a bunch of Mishnahs that say there's no difference between X and Y except for Z, because it follows the same kind of structure as the one that it did about Megillah. But it's stuff that talks about the temple, it's stuff that talks about purity, impurity, it talks about Shabbos and Yom Kippur, all different things, but it's the reason they're lumped together is because they follow the same pattern and they're easy to remember. Well, I understand that, but that means that there's less of an importance to their material than there is to the number. So I'm wondering that maybe this mission is not really teaching me any kind of ethical development. Maybe this chapter has changed. Maybe this chapter in Pirkey Avos is really to teach me basic Jewish ideas. And he's clumped them together in tens, sevens, fives, 10, sevens, fours, and threes. Maybe that's what this chapter is doing. I would have a hard time with that if that was the case. But why take all these tens and put these tens together? So I'll tell you what I think the first message of this mission is. But before I get to the first message of the Mishnah, let's talk about 10. I'm going to spend a little time in the next step about talking about numbers. The Maral feels that there are messages in numbers also, that it's not just not just a number, but the number itself has a message. And when this chapter deals with tens and sevens and fours and threes, there is a reason for that, because every single number, according to the Maral, every single number is significant. The picture of the number is significant. The concept of the number is significant. The name of the number is significant. And we'll get there. But this mission is telling me that with 10 utterances, the world was created. It's also, we know that this is not the only 10 in the world. We know that if you look at God's world and the creation of the Jewish people, the number 10 is very prevalent. I mentioned to you that the next Mishnah says there were 10 generations from Adam to Noah. There were 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. There were 10 tests that Avraham Avinu had. That when God tested him, when he told him to lech lecha me'artzecha, to leave his homeland, to leave his parents' home, that was test number 1. We know that he was told to go up to the mountain and to slaughter his son. That was a test. We know when his wife died after that, that was a test. We know that he was thrown into a fiery furnace. That was a test. Avraham Avinu had 10 tests in his life. Asar Nisyonos. And then we know that there were the famous 10, the 10 makos, the 10 plagues. There were also 10 dibros. There were 10 commandments, which the 10 plagues and the 10 commandments was very much like the birth of the Jewish people. Wonder what the connection between those is and the Asara Ma'amaros, the 10 utterances that God said to create the world. Remember, they're called Aseres HaDibrot. The 10 Dibrot, Ledaber means to talk, the 10 speeches. The way he created the world is the Asara Ma'amaros, the 10 utterances. Interesting. Okay, we know that there is a minyan. To gather a minyan, 10 adult males. We know that in the temple, there were 10 miracles that took place every single day. And we know that God is what we call the emanations of God, the sefirot, a Kabbalistic idea. We know that there are 10 of those, that we talk about God's midos, we talk about God's characteristics. There are seven of them here in this world, 3 of them in the upper worlds and in God's worlds. Those are the 7 earthly characteristics of God. We'll say earthly, the characteristics that we can most relate to, but there are 10 characteristics of God. There are sefirot, there are 10 emanations of God. What's the connection between all the 10s? And what's the message behind the 10s? So we understand that when God created the world, on the first day of creation, he said, let there be light. The light that existed on the first day of creation is very different than the light that you and I enjoy when the sun comes out. The light that we enjoy is light that is already contained inside of an orb. It's contained inside of the sun, and it's light that, used correctly, can benefit us in many, many ways. But when the world was created, and the absence of that light is called choshech, is called darkness. When the world was created, The world was created with light, but the light was not contained inside of an orb, which means that that light was present at all times. And when there was choshech, choshech was also a creation of God's. And when God looked at it and said that the light is so bright, it fills up the entire world, that means if I were to put man inside of that, man would never doubt whether there was a God, because the light would be so bright, which metaphorically means that the clarity of God would be so great that you would never have to wonder, is there a God and where is the presence of God? It's right there in front of you. You open your eyes and it's right there. And it's not that there are periods of choshech necessarily. There's choshech that is placed in front of it. There's darkness that's placed in front of it, but that darkness is its own entity. And what God did was that he took that light and he contained it inside of an orb. And the presence of that light was called or, the absence of that light is called choshech. And by putting it inside of an orb, he contained that light. Our rabbis tell us that what did he do with the rest of the light? The rest of the light was put away for the righteous in the world to come. Now, what does that mean? You know, I just had the unfortunate opportunity to listen to a class from a charlatan that was given live today. And I was shocked. I was shocked. I don't know why I decided to listen, but I listened, and I was very, very, very surprised that there was, besides the false things that were being said and the stupidities that were being said, but there was a total lack of understanding. It was a class given in Mesil Shesharim, and it was a total lack of understanding of the text. Absolute zero understanding of the text. It was amazing to me. You know, we say words sometimes and we never stop to ask, what does that mean? So people throw around these Kabbalistic terms and they say, yes, the light was put away for the righteous in the world to come. What does it mean? I'll give everybody 10 seconds. Think about it. What does that mean? God took the light from creation and he put it away for the righteous in the world to come. What did he put it in a little plastic box? He put it in a little storage container. What does it mean? He put it away for them. What it means is that I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. I'm not a righteous and I'm not in the world to come. But metaphorically, what that means is that in the world to come, God's presence is going to be clear. In this world, God's presence is not clear, and it's not meant to be clear. In this world, we have to work towards clarifying God. We have to work towards getting God into our lives and being able to see God with a clarity. We have to remove the darkness in order to be able to get to the light. But that's not the condition of the world to come. The condition of the world to come is such that the presence of God is so apparent to us and it is so obvious to us that we don't have to scratch our heads. We don't have to wonder where he is. He is there in his glory, and that's what we bask in for eternity. And therefore, God took that matzav, that situation of a clarity of vision of God, and he put that away for the righteous in the world to come. That's the matzav. That's the situation of the world in the world to come. But that's not the situation of the world here. The world here is that if God was so clear and God was so apparent and man did not have to reason to be able to understand and to be able to see God, so then man would be nothing more than a robot. Man would be nothing more than just a mechanism, a thing that saw God, did what he had to do, and he would have no bechira, he would have no choice. He would have no ability to be able to grow. And we know, we've mentioned many, many times, that when we compare angels to human beings, angels are the preferred, you would think that angels are the preferred state of creation, and they are, human beings are the preferred state. Because a human being has to fight to get to where he is. A human being has to grow to where he is. In order for God to be seen in this world and yet not be seen, there needed to be nature. There needed to be points at which you could see the godliness if you chose to. You could open your eyes and recognize God, but that he wasn't apparent if you didn't want to see him, and the choice was yours. And therefore, in creation, what God did was he put himself in this world in 10 places. When he created the light, when he created the trees, when he created the earth, when he created the seas, when he created the animals, when he created the human beings. In every step of creation, wherever it said the word vayomer and let there be, the vayomer was not only let there be this item, but that in this item, God placed his presence. And if you want to see the presence of God, then look outside. And when you see a tree, and when you see a brook, and when you see a gorgeous vista, you have the choice to look at it and say, I'm looking at amazing nature, or Ma Rabu Masech Hashem, how awesome are your ways, God? And you can recognize and see with clarity the presence of Hashem. And God did that in 10 different places. And our job was to find him in those 10 places. God gave Adam an opportunity to be able to see him. He put him in the Garden of Eden. He put him in a situation where all blessing was sitting in front of him. Everything that he could have possibly needed was sitting there. And what did Adam do? He blew it. He didn't see God. He thought that he could hide under a tree because he assumed that God couldn't see him because he couldn't see God. So God gave us another 9 generations. The generation of Cain and Abel and Shais, and onwards, as the Torah tells us. And in those 10 generations, all we had to do in one of them was to be able to find God. And that if we would have found the presence of God in one of those generations, then we would have found the presence of God. We would have seen God in this world. And instead what we did was, we looked up at those heavens, and instead of seeing God in those heavens, we saw sun, we saw moon, we saw stars, and we began to pray to them. And after 10 generations, God looked at it and he said, I've given them 10 chances to see one of my points of connection to this world, and they couldn't find me. And God pressed reset, chose Noah, and started the world now a second time. Why did God start the world a second time? Why not just say, bad design, let's go with a different kind of thing? Because God knew that the human being has the ability to be able to choose and to see him. Nature was only a mask for God. Nature wasn't for the sake of God creating a world with nature in it. God created a world with nature in it, a world with beauty in it, so that through that you can see God, you can see his utterances, you can feel his presence. God knew the human being has the ability to be able to do that, and therefore gave him a second chance, gave humanity a second chance. And that's why there are 10 generations between Noah and Abraham. Again, God gave 10 chances. And again, the world blew it. We couldn't find God in those 10 chances. And that's why God says to Abraham, I see we're going to use a different method here. Instead of expecting the world to develop itself to be able to peek behind those 10 spots and to be able to see me, instead what we're going to do is we're going to pick one nation. And that nation is going to be the teacher nation. That nation is going to have a glimpse of my presence in this world. And then they're going to be able to teach that and the method of how to see that to the rest of the world. So God chooses Abraham, who's not ready yet to be the teacher of the world. And he develops Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Levi, Moshe. And at that point, he's now ready to let them begin to see his presence in the world. the first thing that happens before he's ready to give them his presence is that Egypt comes along. And what was Egypt's entire methodology, entire existence, was to tear God out of the world. Egypt believed in God along with many other gods. But Egypt did not believe in is they did not believe in God's hashgacha. That word is a word that we need to understand. We talk about it often in Jewish philosophy, hashgacha pratis, which is divine providence, which means God's presence and involvement in the world. There is hashgacha pratis. There is hashgacha klolius. There is general hashgacha, God's general watching over the world. There is hashgacha pratis, which is God watching over your life, which we're going to talk about when we talk about the numbers. But there is this concept of hashgacha. Hashgacha doesn't mean walking into a store to make sure that, the milchiks and fleishiks don't get mixed up. Hashgacha means watching over something. Lashgiach means that God is watching over the world and watching over us. They didn't believe that. They didn't believe that God cared about the individual's actions, about the individual's world. And therefore, they tried to tear down God's presence in this world. If you remember back to the movie, Yul Brynner turns to Charlton Heston and he says to him, "Who is your God that I should know him?" And that's pretty much a quote from Chumash. And that what Pare said to Moshe Rabbeinu is that I don't know your God, means I don't have a relationship with him. I don't see him in this world. His presence is not part of my life. Every single time that the Egyptians turned to the Jewish people, what they did was when they put them to work, there were 10 ways that they oppressed them and that they made them suffer. And in every one of those 10 ways, what was Pare trying to do to the Jewish people? He was trying to sever the relationship of the Jews to their God. Pare was trying to obscure their connection to God. And therefore, God turns to Pare and says, "Let the games begin. I need to rebirth this world. I need to put my presence back into this world so that the Jewish people can see my presence. Step number 1, I'm going to start with you, Egypt." And in 10 ways, God reestablishes his presence in the world. Through the earth, through the water, through the animals, through the air, redoing creation. But now through the plagues, through the way that he did so, by destroying the Egyptians and by destroying their notion that God doesn't exist in this world. And now God takes the Jewish nation out of Egypt with those 10 points of light in their lives and turns to them and says, "You memorialize this forever. On this night, you talk about these 10 plagues." What's the purpose of talking about the 10 plagues? Because when you talk about the 10 plagues, your head has to go back to those are the 10 places that God put his presence back in the world, where he smashed the ideology, the belief that God does not exist. There is no hashgacha, God is no providence, God is not present here. And he established himself. He turned on the lights for the Jewish nation and for the world. God understood, though, that the mistake of all previous generations is that even if they had a glimmer of God, they didn't establish it in their lives. And therefore, God turns to the Jewish people in the ultimate act of creation of the Jewish nation, and he gives them the Torah. And he gives them the Torah through 10 utterances, through Aseres Hadibros, through 10 commands. Those commandments, the 10 commandments, were only the Roman numerals of the entire Torah. Every one of the Dibros contained inside of it one of the 613 commandments. Many of the 613 commandments. And therefore, when God said, Zachoros Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho, remember Shabbos, included in that was the mitzvah of tefillin. Why was the mitzvah of tefillin included in that? Because God called Shabbos enos, a sign. And tefillin is called ois. It's a sign, ois hayodecha. Any mitzvah that's called a sign, an ois of the love between us and God, a testimony to the love between us and God, and between God and the Jewish people, comes under that category. All the mitzvahs of belief in God come under the first mitzvah. Every single mitzvah is only a category because there were 10 places that God put himself in our lives, that we didn't just have to look at nature and to be able to see him there. We didn't just have to remember the plagues to remember that God put his presence into the world, but in a practical way, every single day we bring God's presence into our lives. Through the mitzvahs and the observances that we do, those are the 10 points of light. Those 10 points of light are God's presence in this world. It's his emanations. It's the 10 sefirot. And that's why when we gather a minyan, there needs to be 10 people. Because each one contributes their point of light, and that makes the totality, the number 10, which is the total number, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That makes the fullness of the picture. And with everybody's point of light, now God can exist. There are 10 points of light together. When there are 10 points of light together, there is the presence of God. And when there's the presence of God, now we can sanctify God's name. What's the reason that we have a minyan? To daven? No. You can daven ganz fine without a minyan. Why do we need a minyan? So that we can read from the Torah? So that we could say Kaddish? We could say Baruch Hu? We could say Kedusha? Why are those important? Why do you need a minyan? Because what you're doing with every one of those things, you're being Mekadesh Shem Shomayim Berabim. You are sanctifying God's name. Those items, I have a name. They're called Devarim Shebe Kedusha, things that establish God's sanctity into the world. In order to be able to establish God's sanctity, you have to be able to see it. There has to be a basis for it. There has to be a foundation for it. A foundation is these 10 points of light. These 10 points of light emanate from every single human being. And you take the 10 human beings together, and now God's presence is brought into the world. When God's presence is now tangible, we sanctify it and we praise it. And that's why we lean, and that's why we say Kaddish, and that's why we say Kedusha. And that's what this Mishnah is coming, and this Perek is really coming to teach me. And it starts off with Asara Ma'amaras. What it's saying to me is that the job of the Jew is to be able to look at the world and to be able to see the message of the world, not just the world itself. But to be able to look at the world and to be able to see the presence of God, to be able to look at numbers and to be able to see in those numbers, to be able to see godliness, to be able to see God's presence. And I think that the Mishnah was organized in this way because after 15, 18 Mishnayos of this, we get blasted in the head that stop looking at geometrical shapes. Stop looking at numbers. Start to live behind those numbers. Start to see what fuels those numbers. And then you'll start to see what reality is. Peek behind the veil and you'll be able to see God. But you have to be able to look behind the veil. So many, and we've talked about this in the context of Corona. We talk about this in many, many contexts. People live on the surface. I'm not blaming them. I understand why. Because we're living in a physical world. So we get lost in physical things. But behind the surface, that's where the world exists. And what God wants from us, and that's why this Mishnah starts off with Asara Ma'amaras, what Rabbi Yudah Nasi was teaching us, is Don't look at the story of creation and say, that's interesting. There were 10 utterances. God created the world with 10 utterances. Can you pass the ketchup, please? Like, regular. Okay, 10 utterances. Very good. Let's keep living. Stop. What does that mean to be created with 10 utterances? Oh, because he put himself into this world 10 times. Okay, go look for him. He's there. He's present. Go find him. The message of the Mishnayos is a message of get up off your chair and start to think and look at the world in a deeper kind of way. Because the depth of the world is not here on the surface. The depth of the world is behind every number, behind every historical event, behind every single thing that happens to us. That's exactly where you're going to find God. And you'll find them in tens, you'll find them in fours, you'll find them in threes, you'll find them in sevens. But our job is to find God in everything. I had a great conversation yesterday with my Ulpan teacher. It's been a lot of fun, this Ulpan. There's about 8 of us that come on a regular basis. There's probably about 10 or 12 in the class, but there's 7 or 8 of us that come on a regular basis. And there's a few religious people, a bunch not religious people. There's one I'm not 100% convinced she's Jewish, but it's fine. And the teacher is not herself a religious person. She's a very Jewish person, very, very connected Jewishly. She learns, Kabbalah, whatever. But she's she's connected into Judaism, and we have these fascinating discussions, and all has to be in Hebrew. So try to imagine having to express some of these ideas, like I expressed tonight, which are, they're deep, complicated ideas. To be able to express them in a foreign language, it's never simple. But she loves, and the other people in the class also, they love having a rabbi in the class. So they're always asking me questions, and I keep telling them, this is not my class. It's like, this is not my shiur. I don't mind answering your questions, but it's not about me. So yesterday she asked the class, what did you write down 5 sentences in Hebrew, what you learned from Corona. So the whole exercise was amazingly interesting. One religious lady, nice lady, not necessarily a very detailed thinker. She says, 5 sentences? The teacher said, yeah, 5 sentences. She says, I can't get 5 sentences of what I learned from Corona. And it was interesting. She couldn't. One of the other ladies got 6, so she said, okay, I'll borrow one of yours. In other words, she could not, in the 10 minutes that we were given to think this out, she could not think of 5 things that she learned from Corona. I wrote Megillas Esther. Once I started, it just flowed from me. It was just pouring lessons. And I wrote it in the context of that it's not, there many people have learned many different things, and there were people that needed to learn this, there were people that needed to learn this, people needed to learn this. It was really interesting. And other people wrote also fascinating things. Then the teacher looked at the class and said, okay, now I want you to tell me, what's the one thing that you learned? So she wanted us now to distill everything into one thing. So, whatever, people said stuff. And I think the class eventually agreed that the one thing, if you had to put it all into one sentence, we are not in control. The Rabbanu Shlalem runs the world.
Of course.
Now, if you didn't get that from Corona, and when I say from Corona, I don't mean it in the past. I get that. I mean it very, very much in the present. But if you didn't get that from there, then you weren't watching. You weren't looking at what's going on in your life, in the life of everybody else around you. How many hashgacha points, how many stories do you have from the past 4 months of where you recognize that you're not in control and that God is in control? If you don't have 20 of those stories, you've been sleeping for 4 months. Everybody's got them. Everybody's got the plan that they made, the things that they were going to be doing, what they thought their life was going to look like now, what they thought they would be doing on a daily basis, whatever it is. Everybody's got that it's now just crumbled like a piece of paper and tossed to the side. And instead of getting angry at it, we look at it, we say, wow, I'm humbled and I feel small. Katanti mikol hachasadim, and I recognize, God, you're running the world. I think that this Mishnah helps us get to that place. These Mishnayos, the whole Perek, helps us get to that place by helping us to look behind the surface, to be able to look at the number 10 and to say number 10 is not number 10. 10 is the presence of God. And when I see the number 10, I need to peel that off and to look behind it and say, there's God here. When I see the number 7, which we'll get to later, when I see the number 3, when I see the number 4, I know that I'm looking at a structure. I'm looking at something that's sending me a message. And my job is to start to see those messages. The more I know, the more I can see those messages. And that's why this Mishnah was written this way. This Mishnah, these Mishnayos, the entire chapter was written this way in order to give us like a starter kit of this is how you approach the world with depth. Okay, that was a half of an introduction. That wasn't even a whole one. I want to go through next week. Numbers. What are significant numbers? The Maral says every number is significant. So 10, we got a glimpse tonight of what 10 teaches us. We'll do a little bit more on 10. But what does the number 1 teach us? Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9. Every single number. And this is not, I think you all know me well enough. This is not a Kabbalistic approach per se. This is just a simple, very superficial, simple understanding of what's going on in the world. Of when you look at something in threes, when you're davening and you have 3 things in davening, when you have Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, when you have you have Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos, you have Shacharis, Mincha, Ma'ariv. What are the threes? What are the threes teaching me? What are they telling me? When you have 4s, the 4 sons, the 4 cups of wine, the 4 languages of Geula. What's the number 4 teaching me? What's the number 6 teaching me? What's the number 9 teaching me? Where do I see God in those numbers, in their shapes and in their content? Okay, so that's what we're gonna see a little bit next week.
Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to see everybody.
Thank you so much.
And wish you all an amazing week. Stay safe and healthy, which means stay inside. It's I'm doing that too. I'm really going. I go to Minyan and daven outside, and our shul Baruch Hashem opened up the outside area, so that those that want to daven outside can daven outside. There's 1 minyan. Some of the people are inside, and yesterday was amazing. There were 2 guys inside, the chazan was inside, and everybody else was outside. It's whatever. It's the safer place to be. But that's basically what I do. I go to minyan, and then I learn in the house. Most of what I do is on Zoom, and that's the way life is right now.
Ulpan is also on Zoom. Ulpan is on Zoom.
Say again.
Ulpan is also on Zoom.
Ulpan is on Zoom. Yeah.
Okay.
They actually a couple of weeks ago, when they took away all the the stuff here, which they're putting back now, but they took away all the stuff. So they told us we had to come back into the classroom. There are people in the class. We got an 86-year-old guy in the class. I'm one of the youngsters in the class. There are a few people younger than me, but I'm one of the youngsters in the class. And everybody said, we're not coming in. And they put the head of the Ulpan, program on Zoom with us and said, basically she's a very stern lady and says, you have to come in. And we all just smiled at her and said, in English, we're not coming in. And we got the word the next day that, okay, they were allowing our class only to continue on Zoom. So we have Ulpan on Zoom. See, it's a little tough to sit 45 minutes on Zoom, yeah? Imagine what 3.5 hours is. 3.5 hours of talking Hebrew. Shoot me now. But that's what it is. Okay.
Rabbi, what do you mean by shape of numbers? Maybe you'll explain. Do you mean the shape of not of a digit, but do you mean the shape of the word?
No, not the shape of the digit. The shape of the 3, like the number 3. 2 aligns, right? 3 is a triangle. 4 is a square.
Okay.
Right? 5. Well, what do the shapes themselves? What do they have to teach me?
Okay.
And there's a message in the shapes also.
Okay.
Okay. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you so much,
you.
Rabbi.
My pleasure. It's wonderful to see
Thank
everybody.
you.
Those that are there in name, which most of the class, I love when I'm able to see people's faces when I talk. If there's any way, I understand if you're in pajamas, like don't do that. But if there's any way, to show your video, it's just I get a buzz out of being able to see people's faces, and it helps me in my direction and where I'm trying to go. So if there's any way, that would be great.
We'll try.
Okay, folks, have a great day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
The same to you, Rabbi.
There is women's class tomorrow at 11 o'clock. I'm sorry, last week I just completely and totally it was for me it was the day of the gala.
Plus,
And
it was the same day. You'd been up since 4:30 in the morning.
I've been up since 4:30 in the morning, and I just totally
Your time. It's
completely
fine.
just spaced out.
I completely think that was
Which has not really happened that often, but it does happen every once in a while. Okay.
Thank you so